All right, today I'm going to show you how to make this little woven wire ring. So for this, we're going to need 4 pieces of wire. So 3 pieces for our structure and a thinner piece of wire that we're going to use for the weaving. So let's get started by cutting and measuring what we need for the structure wire. So I've got a piece of scrap yarn or string. I'm going to wrap this around my desired finger, and you can see I've already cut this to size. So cut that so that it fits right together. Common error is when you wrap a longer piece around there and cut it, you're not sure which one was which. So just once you've cut it, go back, double check, make sure you've got the right one. Okay, so I've already done a little work here. I'm going to lay this out on a line. I'm going to mark the beginning of it. I'm going to mark the end of the string there. Again, not stretching it out, just kind of keeping it natural. And then I'm going to add 1 inch to that. That extra 1 inch will give us room to kind of finish off the ends of these nice and neat so it's not stabbing us. So for the main structure wire, I am going to cut 3 of those and spend some time straightening those, make sure that they will lay together nice and even, using your nylon pliers, using your eye, whatever you got to do to get those lined up. So once those are straight, now we're ready to cut the weaving wire, and so it's going to be the thinner wire, and we're going to use this string again for that measurement. So I'm going to lay my ruler here, measure again just the string in this case, and you can see it's just a little over 3, not quite 3.5. We're just going to round that up to 3.5 inches in my case. So 3.5 times the magic number for us to have enough wire is going to be 11.5, and that's going to give me a 40-inch piece of wire. So I've got that laid out and cut, 40-inch piece of wire. I'm going to make sure that on the roughest end, I'm going to go ahead and bend that over so that it doesn't end up poking me or my neighbor. Again, kind of a long piece of wire here, so that's a good safety practice there. On the other end is the end we're going to start weaving with, so we'll get started with that. All right, so on one of my structure wires, I've measured over 1 inch, and that's going to be my starting point. I'm going to lay my weaving wire across that line, and now I'm going to take this short end, and you can see I've got about 1 inch, maybe just a tiny bit more there as well. I need it to be that long so I can have some leverage here. So again, I've got the skinny wire crossed right over top of that wire, and I'm going to take this one and start bending it around, trying to make sure that it stays as nice and tight as possible. I'm going to wrap this around 4 times, and when I get to the 4th time, I'm going to take my side nips and cut that off. Go ahead and take a second to squeeze that little sharp piece down. Go ahead and take a second to squeeze that knot together, and you'll get used to that action. We'll be repeating that quite a bit. So making sure that that is going up right at that 1 inch mark that I made on there. Okay, now I am ready to add 1 more wire, and we're going to practice with some chopsticks to get the flow of how this works. So got my first chopstick, and I'm going to tie this around there just like we just did with the wire. I'm just going to hold that in place. You could tape it if you wanted to, or really tie a knot. So got it going that direction. Now I'm going to add 1 more chopstick on top, and this is going to help us get the pattern for our weaving. So I'm going to wrap it just around these top 2 and come down behind, and now I'm going to add my bottom one. So when I add the bottom one right here, now I'm going to go behind here, and I'm just going to wrap it around the bottom 2. So I want you to practice this. Please don't make this one real tight so you can see what the pattern is. So again, now wrapping just around the top 2. This is going to be your guide to creating this pattern. So just around the top 2. Now I'm ready to add just around the bottom 2, and I'll be able to come back to this and make sure that I'm doing the right thing with my wire. So you'll finish that all the way out, with your string, and you'll have that as a guide. So let's get started doing this with the wire. So I've got my wire, my first one added. Now here's my second one. Again, I'm going to line these up, make sure they're in a good place. I'm going to hold these two together with my pliers, and I'm going to wrap it just around these two. And it's important for this to be tight, so I'm making sure to kind of turn that corner nice and tightly and wrap around here. Got tangled up in my video machine here. Okay, so just around the top two. Okay, now I'm going to be ready to add around and add that bottom one. Okay, so add this bottom one. Now, what I want to do now is take a step to tape these together to keep them in the right spot so it doesn't move around on me. So I'm going to double check that it didn't move on me. I want that over about 1 inch, and I'm going to use a piece of tape to wrap this. Alright, so I've got my piece of tape. I'm going to wrap this around here. Start with it on one far end so you get lots of good sticky on there. And wrap that around as many times as you need. I'm going to kind of continue it this way. Make a little handle on here. That would give me something nice to hold on to. The other thing I want you to do is make some sort of mark on this tape to let you know that this is the top side. That way you don't get flipped around backwards and end up with the wrong pattern. Okay, so now that I've got the top two captured, we're going to go back, look at our chopsticks here real quick. Now we know we need to do just the bottom two. So here's where it gets a little tricky in the craftsmanship zone. So I'm going to go up, but I need to go in between these two wires right there. So I'm going to go up, and I'm going to take it down to the end, and I'm going to go right through there and pull that nice and snug. Now, if you have a hard time pulling that nice and snug, that's where your pliers come into play. So I'm going to pull that nice and snug, make sure that's nice and tight, and I'm going to do that again. So wrapping around, again, we'll always do that twice. Come down here to this end, put it through the slot there. Okay, so important step before we do more, we're going to make sure to take these and snug them up nice and tight. It will be too late to do this later on, and this is what makes this pattern nice and neat and makes it a nice ring, is having a nice, neat, spaced out pattern where everything is nice and close together. So next step, just the top two. So I'm going to take this through just these around, so kind of just going around the middle one at that point, and then up around the top. Make sure when you turn that corner, give it a nice tug. Again, same thing, give it a nice tug. If you have a hard time doing that with your fingers, you know, grab a hold of it with the pliers. You should be able to hold this nice and tight that way. And now I'm just going to repeat that same pattern that I had on my chopsticks. So now I'm ready for just the bottom two. Turn that corner nice and tight. Come in between these two. Pull it over as much as I can. This is where sometimes it can get tricky and kind of messy, so give it a squish with those pliers. And again, wrap it around, pull it through there. And before I start adding more, make sure snug those up together. You won't be able to go back and do that later, so make sure you take the time to do that now. Okay, so I've reached the other end. I've got just about a ½ inch left. So how do we finish this off? We're going to finish this off the same way we started it, and that is just to wrap just a couple times around that middle wire. So just that one, nice and tight. So 3 times is probably perfect. Again, snugged it up all the way. You can go back a little bit and kind of fix your pattern if you've got some little spots that don't quite line up and, you know, match what you want with these pliers here. But let's talk about how to really finish this. So I'm going to go ahead and clip this piece off. And this got a little uneven. I'm going to clip those off. Make sure those are pointing down. I can remove the tape here, and we made this a little extra long on this end so that we kind of have a handle here. So let's pull this off, and we're going to do the same thing down here and measure and cut so that it's a 1/2 inch long. Yay. All right, so from here, I'm going to measure and get rid of the extra over 1/2 inch. Again, point down so you don't shoot your neighbor or yourself. All right, so let's talk about how to whoop these ends up so that they look good this way. I'm going to take these pliers here, and they've got the curve to them, and I'm going to bend that up as tightly as possible like that and give them a squeeze. So I'll do that to all of those. Once I get done with that, you can decide, how you want those to lay out on there. And then you can find almost anything that's about the size of your finger to wrap this ring around to get it to fit. Go team!